In the fading light of a late August evening in 1939, along the quiet German-Polish border, a handful of men in borrowed uniforms moved silently through the trees. What looked like a simple border clash was, in truth, one of the most carefully orchestrated deceptions ever devised, a false flag that would plunge the world into the deadliest conflict mankind had ever known. This is episode 8 of our long-form journey through the origins of the Second World War. In our last episode, we followed the final bloodless triumphs and the gathering storm that brought Europe to the very edge of catastrophe. Now, as you settle in and let the day fall away, we step into the shadows of Operation Canned Goods. Tonight's story follows a staged attack at a sleepy radio station, convicts dressed as soldiers, a fake Polish broadcast heard around the world, and the lightning strike on Poland that finally set the entire continent ablaze. I've spent many quiet hours researching and shaping this narrative so it can cradle you gently towards sleep while still giving you a clear, steady understanding of how World War II broke out. If this calm style of storytelling helps you rest, you're welcome to tap that like button and subscribe so we can keep exploring these stories together. And if the mood feels right, drop a comment telling me the coziest spot you're listening from tonight. It would bring me great joy to hear from you. Take a slow breath and let's begin. Late summer air hung heavy with unspoken possibilities as 1939 drew closer to its close. On the 17th day of August, General Franz Halder sat quietly at his desk and opened the pages of his diary to record a rather unusual request that had arrived from Heinrich Himmler, the man who led Hitler's Schutzstaffel, those protection squads that served as the Nazi Party's own armed forces. Himmler had simply asked for a supply of Polish military uniforms, and the note itself carried a subtle air of peculiarity that seemed to linger in the room long after the pen had been set down, as though the words held secrets they were not yet ready to reveal. The army responded in the way it always did, with flawless efficiency. Uniforms were requisitioned from the proper departments, procured through the usual processes, and delivered right on schedule without any delay or complication at all. The entire matter unfolded with the kind of smooth precision that had long defined the German military machine, leaving no loose ends and no unnecessary questions hanging in the air like the faint scent of ink on fresh paper. Probably none of the army leaders, including Halder, had any idea what the clothing was truly meant for. It is almost certain that neither the Chief of Staff nor any other senior commander grasped the deeper purpose behind that simple order as they went about their daily duties in the High Command. The uniforms were meant to serve as a vital component in a larger plan, one that Adolf Hitler had carefully designed to create a convincing pretext for an all-out attack on Poland, though the full scope of the scheme remained carefully concealed from most eyes at the time. The days continued their steady march toward the end of the month. Sometime between that diary entry and the 31st of August, the very eve of the planned assault, 13 convicted criminals were removed from the concentration camp at Oranienburg in eastern Germany and brought to a nearby schoolhouse, where they were installed under quiet guard. There they would remain, held in place until the operation was fully ready to move forward, the building itself standing silent amid the late summer landscape as if holding its breath for what was to come. The project had received a peculiar code name. It was called Operation Canned Goods, a title that referred directly to the prisoners themselves as the goods that would soon be used in the undertaking, which had been planned with two distinct phases in mind. though everything at this stage remained in careful preparation. The men waited inside the schoolhouse walls, while the summer light slowly shifted outside, creating long shadows across the floor that seemed to mirror the lengthening days leading up to the moment when the scheme would finally ripen. Such small and seemingly ordinary actions often form the foundation for much larger movements in history. The uniforms had been supplied exactly as requested. The men had been positioned in advance, and the first elements of a carefully crafted deception were now in place, with methodical care and quiet efficiency. The army leadership continued with its daily responsibilities, completely unaware of the true nature of what they had helped prepare, while the summer evenings grew a little shorter each day, and the gentle sounds of the countryside continued beyond the windows, birds calling in the distance, and leaves rustling in the warm breeze. Yet inside the building, a different kind of silence had settled, one that held the promise of coming change in the most unexpected and hidden manner. The final day of August had arrived, bringing with it a sense of quiet finality. The prisoners, except for one who was kept separate, were given clear instructions to dress themselves in the Polish military uniforms. They did so methodically in the dim interior of the place they had been held, the fabric settling against their skin as the afternoon light outside began its slow descent, creating long shadows that stretched across the ground in peaceful patterns. The next steps followed with clinical calmness. Each man received a fatal injection of a drug that ended his life quickly and without unnecessary suffering, before the group was moved from the place they had been held toward their final destination. The journey took them to a small forest located near Hocklinde, a quiet wooded area lying approximately 10 miles west of the German-Polish border, where the trees stood tall and motionless, as if guarding the secrets they were about to hold. The forest provided a secluded stage for the events that unfolded. There, in the modest woodland, the prisoners were shot and their bodies were carefully arranged in specific positions on the ground. The placement was done with great attention, so that it would appear they had died while advancing into German territory, the scene designed to suggest an invasion attempt that had been stopped at the very edge of the border region. Every detail of the staging served a clear purpose. Later, foreign journalists and other witnesses were brought to this location in the woods so they could see the evidence for themselves. They walked through the trees, observing the bodies laid out in the soft earth beneath the fading light, the entire presentation creating the impression of a conflict that had begun from the Polish side and been met with resistance right there among the trees and undergrowth. This sequence of actions marked the completion of the initial part of the operation, the men who had been selected now forming a tragic part of a much larger design that was slowly revealing itself as the day moved steadily toward evening. The late hours of the 31st arrived, bringing the second phase of the operation into its deliberate motion. The remaining prisoner was escorted by Major Alfred Naujoks and 5 other members of the SS security branch, the ones called the SD. They were hustled off to the nearby town of Gliwice, the party all wearing civilian clothes as they moved through the streets in the gathering twilight, creating soft shadows that stretched across the pavement in quiet patterns. The next steps followed with precise coordination. The men burst into the building and took it over, assuming full control of the facility and the equipment inside, with efficient movements that left no room for interruption. One of Naujok's colleagues then spoke in Polish, delivering an inflammatory statement announcing that Poland was attacking Germany and calling all Poles to join the colors, the words carrying a sense of urgency through the airwaves. The simulated scuffle followed with careful planning. The disguised SD men and the station personnel created much confusion and a good deal of shooting in front of the open microphone, the sounds carrying out to the listeners as the microphone remained active. After the staged disturbance, the civilian-clad prisoner was killed and left lying on the studio floor to impersonate the firebrand Polish broadcaster, the scene arranged to complete the illusion. The next day at 10 a.m. brought a pivotal moment in Berlin. Adolf Hitler rose before the Reichstag deputies and cited the charade at Gleiwitz as an instance of Polish aggression on German soil. He announced that he had thrown all the armed might of Germany against the attacking nation. Thus he launched World War II. The conflict that unfolded carried a deeply personal imprint from its very beginning. It belonged in many vital respects to Adolf Hitler alone, who had chosen both the exact timing and the specific place with absolute intention, after steering his nation through an extraordinary sequence of achievements that involved no loss of life at all, the accomplishments unfolding one after another like chapters in a carefully composed story of rising strength. Those earlier years had been defined by stunning non-violent victories against adversaries both inside the country and far beyond its borders, beginning with his ascent to leadership, the strengthening of the armed forces, the return of troops to the Rhineland, the incorporation of Austria through pressure, and the absorption of Czechoslovakia, the triumphs creating a sense of momentum that felt almost inevitable in the quiet corridors of power where maps and documents lay under soft afternoon light. The moment for a different kind of proof had now arrived. Hitler sensed that the time had come for him to establish his abilities as a commander in the midst of genuine battle, the shift representing a natural progression in his vision from political mastery to the direct arena of warfare, where true resolve could be tested and affirmed. The directives were prepared with clear finality. On the 3rd day of April, he issued formal written instructions to his highest military command, outlining the planned movement against Poland, the operation to begin at any point following the 1st of September. The document set down in the calm atmosphere of his private study, where the weight of future events seemed to rest gently upon the pages like the hush before a significant dawn. On the 23rd of May, he addressed his top leaders for several hours, laying out the full scope of his intentions, the session unfolding in a room where the air carried a subtle gravity and sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, casting warm, quiet patterns across the long table. He explained that he was destroying every pathway of retreat, the resolution of the nation's challenges which in his view arose from the essential need for greater territory to sustain the people of the state, could never be reached without entering the lands of neighboring countries or claiming what rightfully belonged to others, the words delivered with a calm yet unyielding conviction that filled the space around him. Further advancements would remain impossible without the flow of blood, he stated plainly, and the first instance of that necessary cost was intended to take place in Poland, the declaration settling over the room like the gentle turning of a page that could never be unfolded again. The pre-war period had reached its culmination, the instructions and the extended address serving as the bridge between years of peaceful expansion and the commitment to military action, the first blood to be shed in Poland standing as the culmination of a long-held ambition that had grown steadily in Hitler's mind. The pursuit of outright victory now revealed its most powerful instrument. It stood as the essential counterpart to all the earlier maneuvers of secrecy, bluff, and calculated misdirection. a completely fresh approach to conflict built around rapid, coordinated movement on a scale the world had never witnessed before. The entire strategy designed to strike with overwhelming suddenness and leave defenses shattered in its wake. The name given to this approach carried an almost electric quality. It became known as Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, a concept in which armored panzer divisions worked in seamless harmony with high-level bombers, dive bombers, and motorized infantry units, all striking together in one vast concentrated thrust that would tear open enemy lines and pour through the gaps created by the initial shock. The generals gathered there may well have felt a subtle discomfort ripple through them as Hitler outlined the very real hazards of his chosen path, the distinct likelihood that Britain and France would step forward in response, while the Soviet Union loomed as a separate threat along the eastern horizon, the words settling into the space with measured calm as afternoon light softened the edges of the long conference table. Even though every officer present understood with perfect clarity that the nation's military resources lacked both the raw strength and the industrial foundation required to prevail against such a formidable collection of opponents, the fear of displeasing the man at the head of the table, combined with the memory of his unbroken string of earlier achievements, kept their voices restrained and their expressions composed. They carried within themselves an almost mystical trust that he possessed the insight to keep the fighting contained, to strike each adversary in turn, and above all to block any possibility of the Soviet Union joining forces with the Western democracies, an alliance that would drag Germany into the dreaded nightmare of battling on two separate fronts at once. The introduction of this new form of warfare and the candid discussion of its risks had now been laid before them, the path forward illuminated by Hitler's unyielding personal certainty, the officers departing with the memory of his words echoing softly in their thoughts as the day transitioned into evening with its familiar quiet rhythms. The weeks after the May gathering carried a quiet momentum of their own. Hitler managed to accomplish every aim he had outlined, and the officers who had listened in that room felt their trust in his judgment deepen with each passing success, the sense of possibility growing steadily like the soft glow of late summer light across open fields. It came on the 23rd of August, when the crucial non-aggression agreement between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union was signed, a mere 7 days before the planned advance into Poland, the document sealed in a moment of calm precision that seemed to hold the weight of continents within its careful lines. The pact offered Germany something priceless in its simplicity. It granted a completely free hand in the eastern territories, while at the same time guaranteeing a protected rear area should any operations ever become necessary in the west, the assurance settling over the high command like a gentle evening breeze that allowed every plan to breathe more easily. Stalin received his own carefully drawn rewards in return. He gained recognized influence over the eastern regions of Poland, along with selected areas in southeastern Europe and full authority in Finland, plus the Baltic states of Latvia and Estonia, the arrangements creating spheres that suited his vision without demanding any greater cost from the German side. The pact had done its work with elegant efficiency, securing the rear while offering Stalin the gains he sought in eastern Poland and the Baltic lands, the stage set for the coming events in a way that felt both inevitable and profoundly personal, the quiet satisfaction of that diplomatic triumph lingering softly as summer drew toward its close. The morning of the 1st of September carried a profound weight of finality. Adolf Hitler stood before the assembled Reichstag deputies that day, his presence radiating complete assurance in both his instincts and the path he had chosen. The chamber filled with a hushed anticipation as he addressed them directly. He spoke of how he had donned the field grey uniform of an ordinary German soldier, the very same sacred coat he had worn through the trenches of the earlier world conflict, declaring that he would never remove it until victory was secured or until death claimed him. The words delivered with a calm, unyielding dignity that seemed to echo softly through the rows of attentive listeners. By that hour, the opening movements of his campaign against Poland had already unfolded in earnest. Nearly 6 hours earlier, in the deep stillness before dawn, a coordinated assault from land, sea, and air had commenced, with every indication pointing toward a swift and decisive triumph, the darkness yielding gradually to the first faint traces of light on the horizon. The initial gunfire echoed at Danzig within the Polish corridor, that narrow strip of territory separating East Prussia from the rest of the Reich. Polish oversight of this ancient Hanseatic harbour had long stirred deep resentment among Germans, and Hitler recognized a powerful symbolic importance in reclaiming it on the very first day of conflict, the port's medieval spires catching the earliest rays of morning as events unfolded below. The Schleswig-Holstein had steamed in under the pretense of a simple courtesy call, its crew appearing to enjoy the picturesque gabled rooftops and historic charm of the old merchant quarter. Yet their true purpose lay far beyond any sightseeing, the ship itself an aging battleship constructed in 1906, still formidable with its heavy 11-inch guns, now trained silently on the target ahead. On the morning of September the 1st, those guns opened fire against the Polish stronghold at Westerplatte, guarding the entrance to the harbour, the garrison lacking any comparable firepower, and able only to endure the relentless pounding with grim determination, the steady thunder of the barrage rolling across the water like a distant storm that refused to pass. Squadron after squadron of German aircraft passed overhead, resembling great flocks of cranes gliding southward toward Warsaw, the formations moving with graceful precision against the pale dawn sky, their shadows sweeping briefly across the ground below before vanishing into the distance. The entire sequence marked the true beginning of the conflict. The aerial phase of the assault unfolded with devastating precision as morning light strengthened. Hitler's high-level bombers swept across the Polish rear in relentless waves. Within only a few hours, they transformed entire areas into complete disorder, destroying the majority of the Polish Air Force while the aircraft remained stationary on their fields, along with hangars and fuel reserves, the blasts tearing apart railway stations packed with troops still following mobilization instructions, as well as trains, bridges, radio installations, command centers, barracks, and ammunition facilities. High explosive and incendiary devices ignited fierce blazes across urban centers, while spreading waves of panic among the civilian population, the smoke rising in thick columns against the brightening sky, creating an atmosphere of sudden upheaval that seemed both distant and intimately terrifying. Waves of the Junkers 87 dive bomber known as the Stuka descended upon them, a weapon that proved fearsomely effective in ways that went far beyond its physical power. Many of the aircraft were fitted with sirens mounted on their undercarriages, producing a piercing screaming racket as each plane plunged downward, the sound growing louder and more piercing until every soldier below felt convinced the machine was aimed directly at him personally. Trained troops who could have endured far heavier artillery fire found themselves momentarily shaken by the raw terror descending from above, the very sight and howl of it cutting through resolve like a cold wind. through open ground. Motorcycles, armored cars, and tanks rolled forward, followed closely by motorized infantry and artillery units from the panzer divisions, probing carefully for any weakness in the Polish positions. When such gaps appeared, the forces surged through, fanning out behind the lines, disrupting communications and bursting suddenly among units that had believed themselves safely distant from the fighting. The confusion spread rapidly into outright panic. German mobile columns advanced steadily through open countryside, soon slicing the Polish armies into isolated fragments, each broken segment now trapped in an impossible dilemma. The harder any unit resisted frontal assaults, the quicker it became surrounded by troops pouring through the breaches the panzers had carved. On the other hand, any attempt to withdraw simply carried them deeper into the chaos already unfolding in their own rear areas. The psychological weight of those first hours proved almost as powerful as the physical blows. The first hours of battle revealed unexpected layers beneath the surface of the advance. On the Polish side, roads leading away from the frontier quickly filled with a tide of civilians fleeing westward, carts, bicycles, and weary families moving in long, slow columns. While military convoys tried to push in the opposite direction, the two streams tangled together in hopeless confusion, creating bottlenecks that stretched for miles under the warm September sun, dust rising in soft golden clouds that caught the light and drifted lazily across fields already marked by the distant rumble of artillery. Logistical order began to fray almost at once. Trains stood motionless on sidings. Soldiers waited in vain for transport that never arrived. Supplies piled up at depots, while units farther forward reported shortages of ammunition and fuel. The entire rear area seemed to breathe with a quiet panic, the gentle clatter of wagon wheels and the murmur of anxious voices blending into a continuous undertone that carried across the countryside like a soft lament for what had been lost in so short a time. One reconnaissance plane returning low over its own lines drew sudden fire from nervous anti-aircraft gunners below. The aircraft wobbled briefly before climbing away, trailing thin smoke, the incident passing in seconds, yet leaving a faint sting of embarrassment among those who had pulled the triggers. The sky above still carried the echo of the bursts, as if reluctant to let the mistake fade entirely. His command group had paused near a village when shells began falling close by, the explosions sending earth and fragments into the air, while men scrambled for cover. The realization dawned slowly that the fire came from friendly artillery positioned behind them. The barrage lifted only after urgent radio messages cut through the chaos, the dust settling gently afterward, leaving a quiet that felt almost apologetic in the afternoon warmth. Panzer crews and infantry had stopped there to rest, stretching out on the grass while engines cooled and drivers shared cigarettes, the bridge itself standing peacefully in the dappled shade of overhanging trees, when suddenly a rumor swept through the column that Polish cavalry was approaching, the words spreading like ripples across still water, men reaching instinctively for weapons, eyes scanning the tree line. The tension held for long minutes until scouts confirmed the report false, the relief washing over everyone in soft waves as laughter replaced the earlier strain, the river continuing its gentle flow beneath the bridge, undisturbed by the fleeting alarm. These small confusions carried their own quiet weight. One vivid image from those early September days lingers with particular clarity. It involves the Pomorska Cavalry Brigade facing the swift advance of Heinz Guderian's Panzer Corps near the village of Krojanty on the second day of the campaign. The Polish horsemen formed up in open ground, their sabres gleaming faintly under a high clear sky, when the German tanks appeared, rolling forward in dust-churning columns. The two forces met in a sudden violent collision that has since become one of the most enduring symbols of the entire invasion. The charge itself unfolded with breathtaking courage. The cavalrymen spurred their mounts straight toward the armored machines, lances lowered and voices rising in a fierce cry, the horses thundering across dry fields, while machine gun fire answered from the turrets. The encounter was brief, yet intense enough to etch itself deeply into memory, even though the tactical outcome remained overwhelmingly one-sided, the riders falling under the weight of modern firepower, the scene carrying an almost timeless quality of valor, meeting inexorable change. What many soldiers quietly called Hitler weather settled over the theater, a long spell of dry, sunny days with virtually no rain. The ground remained firm and hard-packed beneath thousands of treads and truck tires, allowing panzer divisions to cover astonishing distances each day, the sunlight pouring down in steady golden warmth, turning the Polish plain into a vast bright canvas where movement flowed with unusual ease. Thick clouds of dust rose behind every column of vehicles and tanks, hanging in the still air for long minutes, sometimes drifting sideways across the landscape in slow, lazy veils. The haze obscured vision from a distance, so that German forward observers occasionally mistook friendly units for enemy concentrations, the confusion leading to brief hesitations in command posts, where maps were studied under shaded tent flaps while the distant rumble of engines continued unbroken. General Gerd von Rundstedt, studying reports from the front lines, recognized almost immediately that the main Polish armies had positioned themselves too far forward, choosing to defend the Western territories rather than withdrawing behind natural barriers. He therefore directed his forces to press the advance with deliberate speed, aiming to cut off retreat routes and trap the bulk of Polish strength west of the Vistula River, the decision proving remarkably prescient, as the encirclement gradually tightened like a slow, gentle closing of a hand. Moments like the cavalry charge carried a poignant emotional clarity. The idea of Blitzkrieg grew from a deep longing to escape an old nightmare. During the First World War, both sides on the Western Front had dreamed of a clean breakthrough, a shift from endless trenches to open movement. The long lines of infantry slogged through mud toward barbed wire, while massed cavalry waited patiently in the rear, ready to gallop through any gap and scatter the enemy. Millions of lives were spent trying to create that opening, yet the hole never proved wide enough, and the horsemen never rode free. The stalemate lingered like a heavy fog over the battlefields, draining entire nations of their strength and hope. British General J.F.C. Fuller and French Colonel Charles de Gaulle each explored the possibilities of large-scale mechanized attacks, drawing inspiration from the few times tanks had succeeded in the previous conflict. Their writings sketched out entire battlefields transformed by coordinated armor and air support, yet their own armies largely dismissed the concepts as impractical or even absurd. Fuller found himself eased out of service, while de Gaulle earned a reputation as something of a crank. The ideas seemed destined to remain on paper, gathering quiet dust in distant libraries. In Germany during the 1930s, bright young officers, including then Colonel Heinz Guderian, received real encouragement to test these theories in the field. The environment allowed for open experimentation with motorized units and mock armor. The enthusiasm built steadily as each exercise revealed new potential, the ground beneath training fields trembling faintly under the weight of early prototypes, as if already sensing the changes to come. Guderian and his colleagues envisioned something far more ambitious than scattered support vehicles. They proposed replacing traditional cavalry with fast mobile formations of tracked and wheeled machines, capable of launching the main assault, then widening the breach and exploiting it deep into enemy territory. The core of each formation became the Panzer Division, a self-contained force built around 2 tank regiments, 1 infantry regiment and 1 artillery regiment. Smaller specialized units for reconnaissance, engineering, anti-tank defense, signals and supply traveled in lightly armored half-tracks or trucks, with the ideal that most artillery pieces would move under their own power, creating a complete package that could operate for days without outside help. 2 or more panzer divisions, often joined by a motorized infantry division, formed a panzer corps. Several such corps could later combine into full panzer armies, designed to strike independently behind enemy lines, severing communications and sowing chaos. The ground forces relied on aircraft for constant support, long-range reconnaissance planes spotting targets and enemy movements, while fighters and dive bombers acted as a kind of flying artillery, the entire system moving with a graceful, coordinated rhythm that felt almost choreographed under clear morning skies. Guderian received his first real opportunity in 1931. He took command of a motorized battalion and began field exercises using armored cars and ordinary automobiles, cleverly disguised to resemble tanks. The early vehicles looked crude, some with canvas sides that an infantryman could punch through. Yet the lessons learned proved invaluable. The air during those drills carrying the faint scent of exhaust and dry grass, as crews practiced formations that would one day change warfare forever. A pivotal moment arrived in the spring of 1933. Adolf Hitler attended his first military maneuvers shortly after becoming Chancellor and watched Guderian's unit with growing fascination, the leader's eyes lighting up as the mock tanks maneuvered across the field. He kept repeating with clear excitement that this was exactly what he needed and what he wanted to possess, the words spoken in a tone of genuine wonder, the surrounding officers sensing a shift in the wind, even as the sun warmed the training ground. Over the following 6 years, Hitler provided steady backing. He supported the creation of armored divisions against the wishes of many senior generals, who preferred keeping tanks in small packets, assigned only to assist infantry units. The political and economic benefits of the new approach aligned perfectly with his larger vision. Short, decisive campaigns would place fewer burdens on the German economy and its people, while quick victories would help justify aggressive policies and bind the nation more closely to both the leader and the party. The entire concept carrying a quiet elegance that promised to reshape not only battlefields, but the very rhythm of national life. The gamble Hitler chose carried hidden fractures beneath its surface of confidence. Only 6 divisions truly met the standards Guderian had envisioned for full panzer formations. The rest of the 44 sent against Poland remained old-style infantry units, trudging dusty miles on foot, their artillery and supply trains pulled by horses, the animals moving in patient lines that stretched across the plain, the clop of hooves blending softly with the rumble of distant engines. Factories had only begun producing medium tanks, so most vehicles rolling forward were thin-skinned, lightweight models armed with nothing more than machine guns, their hulls gleaming faintly under the September sun, yet offering little protection against anything heavier than small arms fire. The pact with Russia had removed the threat from that direction, yet Poland's Western allies had promised to intervene if attacked, leaving the Siegfried Line defended by only limited forces along the German-French border. The fortifications stood quiet and lightly manned, while the bulk of German strength surged eastward, the autumn light casting long shadows across empty bunkers. He told visitors repeatedly in the spring of 1939 that at 50 years old he could not afford to wait. The conqueror's mantle of Napoleon might slip from his grasp in another 5 years. so he accepted the gamble with forces far from full strength. The decision made in rooms where maps lay spread under soft lamplight, the air carrying a faint tension of urgency. His Luftwaffe would shield the homeland, he declared. The Ruhr would never feel a single enemy bomb. If one reached German soil, his name was no longer Hermann Göring. The boast delivered with theatrical certainty, the words echoing through conference halls while distant horizons remained deceptively calm. Poland formed a rounded salient projecting westward, like a plump target caught between two powerful arms, one striking south from Pomerania and East Prussia, the other driving north from Silesia and occupied Slovakia. The pincers meant to snap shut across the country's waste, the map lines drawn in steady pencil strokes that promised swift encirclement. Its army numbered 1.75 million, including largely unmobilized reserves, yet possessed only 935 aircraft and 500 tanks, many already obsolete. The force had shone in 1920 against Soviet invaders, but now appeared hopelessly outmatched, the border stretching 1,750 miles after Czechoslovakia's absorption, leaving defenses thin and stretched like a fragile net across open plains. Mobilization had been delayed under pressure from French and British allies. Paris and London feared the move might provoke Hitler, so tens of thousands of reservists still waited in railway stations or rode in freight cars toward their units on the morning of the 1st. The country's limited industry offered no hope for a long war. Spare parts and supplies would require tortuous journeys from France across the Mediterranean, through the Black Sea, and over inadequate Polish rails, the entire logistical chain fragile and slow. At least 30% were not ethnic Poles, with minorities including 2 million Germans holding grievances, the Lithuanians in the northeast, the Ukrainian and Belarusian peasants in the east, the Jewish communities treated as second-class citizens. All created divided loyalties that weakened cohesion. The air in border villages sometimes carrying the distant scent of smoke from manor houses set aflame in old resentments. Standing firm along the entire frontier invited overwhelming attack on weak positions. Pulling back to the Sandvistula and narrow rivers meant abandoning the richest western provinces with their coal mines and factories. The Polish generals settled on a middle path, fighting initially at the borders, then falling back while launching mobile counterattacks, the hope resting on holding long enough for Western allies to strike from the rear, though some officers still spoke quietly of a march to Berlin on the eve of war. German weaknesses had been carefully hidden behind propaganda films showing endless columns of modern armor, yet the reality of horse-drawn trains and light tanks remained, the gamble now set in motion, the entire campaign balancing on the edge of intuition and urgency, the field stretching wide and golden under a sky that seemed to hold its breath for what would unfold.